In World War II, victory is often attributed to weapons, numbers, and strategy. Tanks rolling across open ground, bombers darkening the sky, artillery reshaping landscapes. Grand offensives mapped with arrows and timelines drawn across continents. This is how war is remembered from above. From the perspective of generals, planners, and historians, the conflict appears orderly, deliberate, and almost mathematical. Success is explained through logistics, industrial output, and tactical brilliance. Losses are reduced to numbers on charts. Movements are reduced to lines on maps. But on the ground, where survival was measured in seconds and inches, history looked very different. There, many lives were saved not by firepower, not by heroics, and not by superior equipment, but by a skill rarely taught, rarely acknowledged, and almost never celebrated. It was not marksmanship. It was not courage. It was not technological advantage. It was the ability to read the battlefield. When young soldiers first arrived at the front, they discovered almost immediately that combat bore little resemblance to training manuals or classroom lectures. Maps were neat and logical, reality was not. Battles were loud, chaotic, and visually overwhelming. Smoke obscured landmarks, dust choked the air, explosions disoriented the senses. Fear narrowed perception until only fragments remained: movement without context, noise without meaning, flashes without explanation. Men who had trained for months found themselves unsure where the enemy was, where friendly units were, or even where they themselves stood in relation to the fight. Directions lost meaning, landmarks vanished, time itself felt distorted. Training had taught them what to do, combat demanded knowing when to do it and when not to. Those who survived long enough began to realize that battlefield survival depended less on aggression and more on awareness. Less on speed and more on timing. They learned to sense danger before it arrived. This skill had no official name. It was not listed in manuals or awarded citations. It emerged organically, passed between soldiers through observation, silence, and hard-earned experience. And it saved thousands of lives. Veterans later said the battlefield was never silent, it only appeared so. To the untrained eye, quiet meant safety. Silence meant the enemy was gone. Stillness felt reassuring. To the experienced soldier, quiet often meant the opposite. The battlefield communicated constantly, but in subtle, easily missed ways. It spoke through absence as much as presence. A tree line that felt too still, a village that looked abandoned too neatly, footprints where no one should have walked, a sudden absence of birdsong, a road that seemed untouched when everything else was scarred. These details meant something. They often signaled ambushes, sniper positions, artillery observers, or concealed enemy movement. They hinted at danger before bullets flew or shells fell. Men who learned to notice these details learned when to stop, when to change direction, and when to wait. Those who didn't often walked straight into death. At first, soldiers moved the way they were trained: directly, quickly, decisively. Momentum mattered. Hesitation felt dangerous. Standing still felt exposed, but the battlefield punished predictability. Veterans began to notice patterns. Enemy positions were rarely random. Ambushes favored choke points. Machine guns covered obvious routes. Artillery targeted crossroads, bridges, hedgerows, and open ground. The safest-looking path was often the most dangerous. A door left ajar in an abandoned house wasn't carelessness, it was bait. Freshly disturbed soil wasn't debris, it was concealment. A lone body in the road wasn't always dead, it was sometimes a trap. Men who survived long enough learned to pause when something felt wrong, even if they couldn't explain why. They learned to trust discomfort more than reassurance. Those pauses saved lives. This skill was often described as instinct, but it wasn't innate. It was learned. It developed through exposure, mistakes, and observation. Soldiers noticed that the men who lived longest were not necessarily the strongest, fastest, or bravest, but the most observant. They watched terrain closely. They listened carefully. They noticed changes: what was new, what was missing, what didn't fit. They moved deliberately rather than impulsively. They trusted their discomfort. When something felt wrong, they slowed down. When something looked too quiet, they prepared for violence. When something felt rushed, they resisted the urge to hurry. Their instincts were built through survival and reinforced by loss. World War II training emphasized aggression. Advance, press forward, maintain momentum, keep moving. Hesitation was often equated with fear. Fear was seen as weakness. Weakness was unacceptable, but combat taught a different lesson. Restraint became a survival skill. Experienced soldiers learned not to fire immediately, not to rush cover blindly, not to assume silence meant safety, not to reveal their position unnecessarily. They learned that movement attracted fire, that noise invited attention. That patience often revealed the enemy before the enemy revealed them. Waiting allowed enemy troops to expose positions. Waiting allowed artillery barrages to pass. Waiting prevented unnecessary casualties. In a war where movement often meant death, stillness became protection. Stillness as a weapon. Stillness did not mean passivity. It meant control. Soldiers who learned to remain motionless when under threat denied the enemy targets. They forced attackers to reveal themselves. They conserved energy and preserved focus. Many veterans later recalled moments where doing nothing, lying in mud, snow, rubble, or tall grass was the most important decision they made that day. The instinct to act was powerful. Fear demanded motion. Training encouraged advance. Resisting that instinct required discipline and experience. Stillness saved lives. Contrary to popular imagery, the most aggressive soldiers often did not survive the longest. The men who lasted were quiet, observant, calculated. They moved only when necessary. They avoided unnecessary exposure. They listened more than they spoke. They watched more than they acted. They trusted their instincts even when orders felt disconnected from reality on the ground. This was not cowardice. It was adaptation. Military doctrine emphasized obedience. Orders were meant to be followed precisely. Discipline held units together under fire, but combat rarely unfolded according to plan. Maps were outdated. Intelligence was incomplete. Enemy positions shifted. Weather intervened. Units became separated. Soldiers on the ground were forced to interpret reality moment by moment. Those who survived learned when to follow orders strictly and when to adjust them to circumstances without hesitation. They learned when to advance and when to pause, when to obey and when to adapt. Combat punished blind obedience just as harshly as recklessness. The ability to read the battlefield bridged that gap. This hidden skill was rarely taught formally. It spread through example. A veteran would suddenly stop, raising a fist. A sergeant would alter a route without explanation. A quiet warning would pass down the line, "Something's wrong." New soldiers learned quickly to trust these moments. They noticed that the men who issued such warnings were often still alive. In this way, battlefield awareness became an informal education system, one written in survival rather than words. Sometimes the lesson came too late. Entire units learned what not to do because others paid the price. A patrol wiped out after advancing too quickly. A squad ambushed because they ignored warning signs. Those who survived carried these lessons forward. The battlefield taught brutally but effectively. Why it was never officially taught. Military institutions struggled to codify this skill. It relied on intuition shaped by exposure. It could not be standardized or measured. Teaching it required acknowledging uncertainty, fear, and chaos, concepts military doctrine often avoided. It also required admitting that survival sometimes depended on hesitation, not aggression. Yet despite this, the skill persisted. It required no equipment, no ammunition, no technological advantage, only attention. This skill did not earn medals. There were no citations for deciding not to advance or sensing danger, but its impact was immense. Entire patrols avoided ambush. Units bypassed killing zones. Men lived to fight another day because someone noticed what others did not. Survival was often quiet. It happened in moments when nothing happened. When the war ended, many veterans discovered the skill did not fade. They remained hyper-aware. They scanned rooms automatically. They noticed exits, movements, hands. Crowds felt unfamiliar. Silence felt suspicious. What had saved them in combat made peace difficult. The battlefield had trained their minds for constant vigilance. For many, it took years, sometimes decades, to relearn how to relax. The ability to read the battlefield was not about violence. It was about perception. It was about noticing what didn't belong, what didn't feel right, what didn't align with expectation. It was a deeply human skill born from fear, refined through experience, and preserved through memory. World War II was won with weapons and strategy but survived with awareness. The hidden skill that saved thousands was not taught in manuals or celebrated in films. It was learned through fear, loss, and observation. It was the ability to read the battlefield, to know when to move, when to stop, and when not to act at all. In a war defined by noise and destruction, survival often depended on those who learned to listen.